The unseen weakness. In the far reaches of the galaxy, humanity was often seen as nothing more than an insignificant speck. The most advanced alien races considered humans weak, primitive, and no threat to their mighty empires. The galaxy's most powerful species laughed at humanity's fragile nature. They viewed humans as mere survivors in a universe full of deadly predators. The humans had no technology that could rival theirs, no armies to speak of, and no ships capable of challenging their space fleets. It was a time when humanity's place in the universe was always questioned. The aliens had long ago dismissed the humans as nothing more than a curiosity, a species that would eventually fade away, crushed by the weight of more advanced civilizations. Their belief was simple: humans could not survive on the scale that other species had. They would not last long, and there was no need to worry about them. Humanity was destined for extinction, if they weren't already on the verge of it. But then, something happened. It was something that no one expected. The universe was about to learn just how wrong the aliens were. The galaxy's greatest minds had long debated the future of humanity. Some believed that Earth, with its rapid advancements in technology and culture, would someday rise to be a formidable force. Others, though, disagreed, thinking that humans would always be vulnerable, weak in comparison to the galaxy's mightiest species. The humans, however, had something the aliens could never understand. They had an unshakable will to survive, no matter the cost. It was a trait that could not be measured by technology, power, or even size. It was an intangible force that could never be replicated by any other species in the galaxy. This weakness, as the aliens saw it, was the key to humanity's survival. The aliens failed to realize that it was not technology or advanced weaponry that would ultimately determine a species' survival. It was something deeper. It was the drive to never give up, to keep going when all seemed lost. This trait had been passed down through countless generations, from the earliest humans to the most modern. It was embedded in their very DNA. Despite being underestimated, humanity had managed to survive on a planet that many thought was hostile to all life. Earth had been a world where natural disasters, wars, and disease had threatened human survival for centuries. Yet time and time again, the humans found a way to adapt, to fight, and to overcome whatever challenges stood in their way. However, the galaxy's alien civilizations didn't understand this. To them, Earth's history was a mere blip in the grand scale of the universe. They saw humans as flawed and fragile. When the decision came to send a group of humans to a deadly, unexplored planet, the aliens were confident it would be a one-way mission. They believed this mission would finally prove humanity's fragility once and for all. The planet, known only as Xerath, was a place where no other species had ever survived for long. Its atmosphere was toxic, its gravity crushing, and its wildlife was savage. The technology of any visiting species would fail within hours. The Xerathians, the native inhabitants, had long since left their planet, believing it to be cursed. No one could live there, let alone thrive. The aliens thought this would be the perfect test to rid the galaxy of humanity. They believed that sending humans to such a hostile planet would end their threat for good, but they did not anticipate the true strength that humanity possessed. As the human crew entered the planet's atmosphere, the alien generals washed from their ships, eager to witness humanity's demise. The humans, unaware of how much the galaxy doubted them, faced a harsh reality. Their technology began to fail. Their life support systems malfunctioned, their energy shields flickered, and their sensors went dark. The planet's atmosphere was already wreaking havoc on their advanced equipment, but the humans, determined and resourceful, did not give up. They didn't panic. They didn't run. They adapted. In the face of seemingly insurmountable odds, the humans proved that there was one thing they had that the aliens lacked: the ability to think outside of the box, to find solutions even when everything else failed. The crew quickly realized that relying on their technology would be their downfall. They had to use their instincts, their intelligence, and their courage. The first few moments were chaotic, but they managed to make the necessary adjustments and keep going. As the humans trudged forward through the harsh environment, the alien generals couldn't help but feel a strange sense of unease. The humans were doing the impossible. They were surviving. The planet that had destroyed machines with ease couldn't stop them. In fact, the humans were thriving, not because of their advanced technology, but because of their unbreakable will. The aliens had underestimated humanity. They had thought that humans would crumble, that they would be crushed under the weight of a planet designed to destroy everything they knew. But instead, the humans had found a way to survive. They had done the unthinkable. They had shown the galaxy that humanity wasn't fragile, and that the strength of a human spirit could never be measured by technology or physical strength alone. The first few days were the hardest, but the humans didn't falter. They pressed on. They proved that they could survive where others could not. The alien generals watched in silence, unsure of what they were witnessing. Their disbelief grew as they saw humanity adapt and conquer the impossible. It wasn't just survival they were witnessing. It was a new beginning. And this, the humans would soon learn, was just the beginning. The universe had no idea what they had just set in motion. The first challenge. The humans had only just begun their trek across the desolate, hostile surface of Exharath. Every step was a test, not only of their endurance but of their creativity and adaptability. Their spacecraft was in ruins, and communication with the outside galaxy had been cut off the moment they entered the atmosphere. No one knew they were still alive, and the alien generals had assumed the worst. But the crew of human survivors were a resilient force, and Exharath had only sparked their determination. The planet's atmosphere was thicker than any human had experienced before. It was suffocating, thick with poisonous gases that would have killed anyone without a proper suit within hours. Even with their suits, the humans felt the strain. Their oxygen was running low, and the heat from the planet's surface was unbearable. The gravity, almost double that of Earth's, made every movement feel like walking through molasses, but they didn't complain. They simply adjusted and adapted, a trait that had served them well throughout their long history. The first night on Exharath was the most harrowing. The sun barely provided any warmth, casting the planet into a cold darkness that seemed to reach deep into the bones of the humans. The temperature dropped drastically, far below anything their equipment had been designed to handle. It was as if the planet itself was warning them to leave, to turn back. But turning back was not an option. The team of human survivors, led by Captain Samantha Carter, a battle-hardened veteran, knew they could not survive without shelter. The harsh winds of Exharath tore through the air, whipping up dust and sand that felt like tiny daggers. If they couldn't find cover soon, they would freeze to death. Every breath they took in the toxic atmosphere burned their lungs, and the weak oxygen supply in their suits seemed to be depleting faster than they could manage. "We need to find shelter, fast," Captain Carter barked, her voice steady despite the panic rising within her. She looked around the barren landscape, scanning the horizon. The only thing she could see for miles was a jagged mountain range, looming dark and foreboding in the distance. But between her crew and those mountains were vast fields of rocky desert and valleys that seemed to stretch on forever. It was as though the planet itself was conspiring against them. Her second-in-command, Lieutenant Daniel Reyes, tapped his helmet, checking the energy readings on his suit. "We're not going to make it much longer with the energy draining like this. We'll be out of oxygen within a few hours." Captain Carter's mind raced. She knew that this was only the beginning of their survival challenge. Their technology was failing them at every turn. Yet it wasn't just the cold or the oxygen that threatened their survival. It was the very planet itself. Exharath wasn't just a barren wasteland. It was an active participant in their struggle. The planet fought back. The crew had no choice. They couldn't afford to stand still. Moving was the only option. "We're heading for those mountains," Carter ordered, her voice unwavering. "It's our best shot." The first few miles were treacherous. The harsh wind whipped at their faces, their suits making it nearly impossible to see clearly. Every few steps, the ground beneath their feet seemed to tremble, as if the planet itself was warning them to stop. But the humans didn't stop. They pressed on, determined to find safety. As they journeyed deeper into the wilderness of Sirath, the landscape grew even more inhospitable. The terrain was jagged and uneven, with sharp rocks jutting from the ground. There were no rivers, no lakes, only dust, sand, and endless rocky plains. It was clear that no life had ever thrived here. The planet's surface was a graveyard, and it seemed that only death awaited those foolish enough to land. After what felt like hours, Captain Carter's team reached the base of the mountains. They were exhausted, their suits heavy from the weight of their gear and the oppressive atmosphere. But they had made it. They had survived the first test that Serath had thrown at them. "Set up camp," Carter ordered. "We need to regroup and figure out our next move." The team of humans worked together to set up a temporary shelter against the rocky cliffs, using what little equipment they had left. It wasn't much, but it would have to do for now. As they huddled together in the shelter, they couldn't shake the feeling that Serath was watching them, that the planet was alive with some ancient, malevolent force. It was as though every step they took was being tracked by unseen eyes, waiting for them to make a mistake. But even as the harsh winds howled outside and their supplies continued to dwindle, the humans didn't give in to fear. The alien generals may have believed that the planet would wipe them out, that this was the end of humanity. But the humans were proving something that the galaxy had yet to learn. They were capable of more than the galaxy had ever imagined. In the dead of night, as the winds howled and the temperature dropped further, Captain Carter couldn't help but smile grimly. "We're still alive," she muttered to herself, "and we'll keep fighting. We'll show them all." The unexpected force. The cold and the endless night pressed against the humans, but in the midst of it all, something unexpected happened. The very ground beneath their feet began to rumble, as if Serath itself had awakened. It was subtle at first, a soft tremor that sent small stones tumbling down the nearby cliffs. But soon, the rumble grew louder, stronger, until it felt as though the planet itself was coming to life, challenging the humans in a way that was almost predatory. Captain Carter stood up, her senses alert. "Everyone, stay sharp," she ordered, scanning the horizon through her helmet's heads-up display. She knew this planet was dangerous, but the ground shaking beneath them was new, and they hadn't planned for it. "Maybe it's just another tremor, Captain," Lieutenant Rives suggested, trying to remain calm. But Carter wasn't so sure. She had been through too many hostile worlds to ignore the signs. This didn't feel like a natural earthquake. Something was coming, and she could feel it in the pit of her stomach. The crew quickly assembled, checking their suits and equipment. They had to be ready for anything. Suddenly, the ground gave way beneath their feet. With a screech of shifting rock and earth, a massive crack split the ground wide open just a few yards from their shelter. A sudden gust of wind howled through the valley, sending dust and debris flying into the air. The crevasse in the ground widened, revealing something much darker and more dangerous than they could have imagined. From deep below the surface, a low growl echoed, reverberating through the air like the sound of a predator about to pounce. Then, from the depths of the crevice, something large and shadowy began to emerge. Carter's heart raced. Whatever this was, it wasn't natural. This wasn't just another harsh trial from the planet. It was a new danger, and they had to face it head-on. "Get ready for a fight," she shouted, her voice commanding, even as her mind raced to find a way out of this mess. The creature that emerged from the crack was massive, easily towering over the humans. It had the body of a serpent, but its head resembled a massive twisted scorpion, with two sharp pincers that snapped as it moved. Its thick, armored hide shimmered in the dim light of the planet's distant sun, making it look as though it were made of stone itself. It was a living nightmare, something no one could have predicted. Its eyes, glowing an eerie yellow, locked onto the humans with a calculating hunger. Without thinking, Carter raised her weapon and fired at the creature, but the beam bounced off its armor. The creature hissed, an unsettling, guttural sound, before it lunged forward with terrifying speed, snapping its pincers just inches from her crew. "Fall back," Carter screamed, pulling Rise out of the way as the creature's pincers crashed into the ground where he had just been standing. The humans scrambled to get to their feet and retreat, but the ground shook again, causing several to lose their balance. Carter looked around frantically, trying to assess the situation. There was no cover. They were standing on an open, rocky plateau, and they couldn't outrun this monster. Their best chance was to outsmart it. But how? It was too fast, too strong, and its armor was nearly impenetrable. Then, just as the creature prepared to strike again, a small, forgotten part of the planet's environment made itself known. A long, jagged rock formation stood off to the side of the plateau, and Carter quickly calculated the distance. If they could just make it to that rock, they might be able to use it for cover. "Move to the rocks," she shouted. With everything they had, the crew sprinted toward the jagged rocks, trying to outrun the creature that had been hunting them. They could hear it behind them, the sound of its enormous body crashing through the debris as it chased after them with relentless determination. The humans were quick, but they weren't fast enough. Just as Carter reached the first rock, the creature slammed into the ground with a violent roar, its pincers snapping with deadly precision. It missed her by inches, and Carter felt her heart skip a beat. But she wasn't about to stop now. She scrambled up onto the rock and drew her blade, preparing herself for whatever the creature would throw at them next. The rest of the team reached the rocks, taking cover behind the large stones, their weapons aimed at the beast that was now circling them. The creature was relentless, but it seemed to pause, as if it were analyzing its prey, weighing its options. It was then that Carter realized something important. This wasn't just any creature. This was an ancient predator, built to survive in an environment like Exharath. It was an apex hunter, and the planet had created it to ensure that nothing could survive here. But the humans had already survived the worst of what Exharath had thrown at them. They had faced its toxic air, its extreme gravity, and the desolation of the landscape. This creature was simply the next obstacle in their path. And like all obstacles, they would overcome it. "On my mark," Carter shouted, adrenaline coursing through her veins. "When I say go, we make our move. We're going to bring it down." The creature roared again, its terrifying eyes locking onto the humans. It was coming for them once more. Carter raised her hand, waiting for the right moment. The battle for survival was far from over, but for the first time since they arrived on Exharath, the humans finally understood something crucial. Exharath might have been hostile. It might have been a place that no one should survive. But the humans had already proven that they could handle its deadliest challenges. They could fight back against anything, even a planet that had seemingly been designed to destroy everything in its path. The fight for survival. The creature, now fully aware of its prey's presence, let out a terrifying roar. The ground trembled with its force, and Carter's heart pounded in her chest. Her team was behind the rocks, but she could see the fear in their eyes. This was no ordinary battle. This was a test of everything they had. Everything they had come to believe about survival on Exharath. "Ready," Carter shouted, her voice steady despite the mounting fear. "Hold your ground. We got one chance." The creature's massive body slithered toward them, its pincers snapping in a deafening rhythm. It was as if the planet itself had created this beast with one purpose in mind: to destroy the humans who dared to survive on Exharath. The sound of its approach made the air thick with tension. The wind howled, and the dust in the air swirled like a living thing. The team crouched low, gripping their weapons tightly, eyes locked on the beast. Carter's mind was racing, trying to calculate how best to take down the seemingly indestructible monster. It was fast, strong, and it could move through the rough terrain as though it were nothing. But it also had weaknesses. Every creature did. The key was finding them before it found them. "On my mark." Carter's voice cut through the tension. She gripped her own weapon tightly, ready to strike. The creature lunged again, its pincers snapping just inches from Carter's face. She barely had time to react, diving to the side as the enormous appendages crashed down into the rock, sending chunks flying. The sheer force of the attack shook the ground, and dust and debris filled the air. The team scattered, diving behind the rocks for cover as the creature followed, relentless in its pursuit. One of the soldiers, Lieutenant Reyes, fired his weapon at the creature's back, but the shots barely seemed to affect it. The beast was too powerful. Its stone-like armor deflected the blasts, and it retaliated with a terrifying speed, whipping its tail toward Reyes. He barely dodged in time, but the creature's tail caught the edge of his suit, sending a shockwave through his body. He grunted in pain but didn't give up. They couldn't afford to. "Reyes, fall back," Carter shouted, even as she fired a shot of her own, aiming for the creature's exposed underbelly. The creature howled in anger, rearing back as the shot struck its soft belly. But it wasn't enough to slow it down. The monster's skin quickly healed, the wound closing as though it had never been there. Carter's heart sank. They needed something more, something that could break through its defenses. The team was beginning to panic. Each time they fired, the creature seemed to grow more enraged, and the rocks around them began to tremble under the force of its attacks. There was no escape. If they didn't find a way to deal with the beast, they would be crushed under its weight, just like every other expedition that had come to Exhilarating. But then, Carter noticed something. The beast's glowing yellow eyes weren't just focused on them. They were focused on her. The creature was intelligent, and it recognized her as the leader. It wasn't just attacking blindly. It was strategizing, hunting them like prey. But that realization brought a new hope. If it was smart enough to be tactical, then there had to be a way to outsmart it. "Reyes, get to the left flank," Carter shouted, her voice now filled with a sense of urgency. "Simmons, take cover behind the rocks on the right. We need to confuse it." Her plan was simple: divide and conquer. If they could split the creature's attention, they might stand a chance. Reyes and Simmons moved quickly, their bodies darting from cover to cover as they tried to flank the creature. Carter, in the meantime, stayed where she was, waiting for the moment when she could strike. The creature followed them, focusing on the movements of the two men. It was distracted for the moment, its attention split between them. Carter saw her opening. "Now," she shouted, her heart racing as she charged toward the beast. She took a running leap, diving towards the creature's exposed underbelly. The creature turned just in time, its pincers snapping in her direction. She twisted midair, narrowly avoiding the deadly pinch of its claws, and landed right beside it. In a desperate move, Carter pressed the button on her weapon, activating a high-powered energy pulse. She aimed it directly at the creature's soft spot, the area just beneath its armor, where its organs would be most vulnerable. The weapon hummed with energy, and in an instant it discharged, sending a blast of light that cracked through the creature's tough skin. The beast howled in pain, its enormous body writhing and thrashing violently. For a moment, it seemed like the planet itself was shaking with its rage. The ground trembled again, and huge chunks of rock fell from the cliffs around them. The dust was thick, and visibility was low, but the creature was not giving up. It turned its fury back on Carter, its eyes filled with the kind of hatred that only an apex predator could hold. "Carter, get back," Reyes yelled, firing another barrage of energy blasts to distract the creature. The fight was far from over. Carter knew they couldn't keep up this pace for much longer. But she also knew one thing: humans had a way of surviving even the most impossible odds. Exhilarating might have wanted to break them, but they were far from defeated. "Keep fighting," Carter shouted, determined to protect her team and prove that humanity would never back down. Not even when faced with the most brutal force this planet could throw at them. The turning tide. Carter's heart raced as she rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding another deadly strike from the creature's vicious tail. The impact of the tail smashing into the ground created a shockwave that sent rocks flying in every direction, nearly knocking her off balance. Dust swirled around her like a storm, making it hard to see anything clearly. Her breaths were heavy, her suit's internal temperature rising as the strain of the fight took its toll. "Reyes. Simmons," Carter barked, her voice sharp. "We need a plan, now." "The creature's not backing down." She barely finished speaking when the creature roared again, a sound so deafening it rattled her bones. Its massive pincers clicked with menace as it adjusted its stance, no longer attacking blindly. The monster had grown smarter. It was learning. Carter knew it wouldn't stop until they were all dead, unless she did something drastic. From the corner of her eye, Carter saw Simmons sprinting for a rocky outcrop on the left. His movements were fast, but he was injured. His suit had a burn mark on the chest where the creature had struck him earlier, and he was moving slower than usual. She couldn't afford to let him be an easy target. "Simmons, fall back," Carter shouted, raising her weapon. But before Simmons could react, the creature had already turned, its gaze locking on him. "Simmons, move," Carter yelled again, but it was too late. The creature surged forward, its tail swinging in a wide arc. Simmons leaped to the side, but the tail caught his leg. He screamed in pain as the impact sent him crashing to the ground, and the monster began to close in. Carter's stomach dropped, and before she could think, she ran toward him, adrenaline flooding her system. "Get away from him," she screamed at the creature. In a split second, the creature turned its full attention back to her, its glowing yellow eyes narrowing in fury. It was as if the monster knew she was the true threat now, the one that had been causing it pain. Carter's hand tightened around her weapon, and her body was filled with an electric charge. Her thoughts became razor-sharp, every moment, every movement carefully calculated. "Reyes, now," she shouted. Reyes had been waiting for the perfect moment. He dashed forward from his position behind the rocks, his gun raised and ready. As the creature reared back to strike, he fired. The blast hit the creature in the side, drawing a howl of pain from the beast. The shot distracted it, just enough for Carter to act. "Now's our chance," she yelled, springing into action. Carter darted behind the creature, her eyes never leaving its movements. She could see the creature's weak spots, its exposed joints, and the soft tissue beneath its armored plating. It was now or never. In one fluid motion, she hurled herself onto the creature's back, clutching onto the rock-like spikes protruding from its body. The beast bucked in response, throwing itself into a frenzy, but Carter held on with every ounce of strength she had. Her knuckles were white as she gripped tighter. "Reyes, help," she screamed, her voice filled with desperation. Reyes reacted instantly, his gun trained on the creature's vulnerable spots. He fired again, this time hitting the underbelly of the beast. The blast caused the creature to stagger, allowing Carter a moment to strike. She reached for a special device she had strapped to her belt, a harpoon-like weapon designed for situations like this. She activated it with a single press of a button, and in a flash, the harpoon shot out, embedding itself deep into the creature's soft underbelly. The creature shrieked in agony, thrashing uncontrollably. Its massive tail swung wildly, narrowly missing Carter. Her heart pounded as she knew the time to finish it was now. The beast's movements were growing slower as the harpoon's energy field disrupted its internal systems, weakening it. But it was still alive, still dangerous. With a final surge of strength, Carter climbed higher up the creature's back, using the spikes to anchor herself. She aimed her weapon at the spot where the harpoon had struck, focusing her energy into one final blast. "Take this," Carter shouted as she fired, sending the full power of her weapon into the beast. The impact was devastating. The creature convulsed violently as the energy blast ripped through its chest. The ground shook once more as the creature's body buckled under the force. The massive beast let out one final scream before collapsing to the ground with a deafening thud. Carter barely had time to breathe before she jumped down, landing on the rocky surface with a roll. Her body ached, but she couldn't allow herself to rest just yet. She rushed to Simmons' side, where Reyes was already helping him up. "Is he okay?" Carter asked, her voice tight. "He's hurt, but he'll make it," Reyes replied, his voice filled with relief. "We've got him." Carter nodded, wiping the sweat from her forehead. She could still hear the distant howls of the creature's dying cries echoing through the canyon, but the immediate danger was over. They had done the impossible, survived on Xerath, against the odds. But Carter knew this battle was just one of many. Xerath wasn't done with them. The planet still had secrets to uncover, dangers lurking beneath the surface, and tests of survival yet to come. But for now, they had won, and that was enough. She turned to her team. "Let's move. We've got more work to do." They had survived the creature, but the true battle for Xerath was just beginning. The heart of Xerath. The air felt heavy, thick with the oppressive heat and the weight of the unknown. As Carter and her team began to make their way further into Xerath's hostile landscape, the ground beneath their feet seemed to pulse with an eerie, unnatural rhythm. The planet wasn't just alive, it was watching them, as if it could feel every step they took. The creature they had just slain was a mere warning, a reminder of the dangers that lurked in every corner of the planet. Xerath wasn't just a hostile world, it was a living, breathing force of nature that had its own rules, its own deadly ecosystem. But they had proven that humans could survive here. They had proven that they were not fragile, not weak, not something to be exterminated. Carter looked ahead, her mind racing. The team was exhausted, but they couldn't stop now. The mission was far from over. Their objective was clear: locate the heart of Xerath, the source of the planet's mysterious power, and determine whether it could be harnessed, or if it was something too dangerous to touch. They had no idea what they would find, but they had no choice but to keep moving forward. "I'll take point," Carter said, breaking the silence that had settled over the group. "Reyes, Simmons, you two keep an eye on the rear. We can't afford to be blindsided again." Reyes gave a terse nod, while Simmons winced, still clutching his side from the earlier battle. "Got it, Commander," he replied, though his voice was strained. The journey was arduous. The terrain was treacherous, with jagged rocks, deep crevices, and thick, tangled foliage that seemed to reach out like grasping fingers. The further they ventured, the more the landscape twisted into something unnatural. Plants that grew in impossible patterns, trees that bled a thick, dark substance when cut, and strange sounds that echoed from deep within the shadows. Every instinct Carter had screamed at her to turn back, but she refused to listen. This was her team. They had come this far, and they would not fail now. Suddenly, a soft hum filled the air, almost imperceptible at first. Carter's sharp ears caught it before anyone else, and she immediately froze, signaling for the team to halt. The hum seemed to vibrate through her very bones, making her skin crawl. "What is that?" Simmons whispered, his voice low and cautious. "It's coming from that direction," Carter said, pointing toward a narrow valley ahead. The trees were sparse here, and the ground was uneven, with strange stone formations rising up from the earth like ancient ruins. The hum grew louder as they moved toward it, now accompanied by a faint glow emanating from the stone structures. They approached cautiously, weapons at the ready, their steps careful and deliberate. The closer they got, the more the hum seemed to envelop them, making it difficult to focus. It was almost as if the planet itself was alive, and it was trying to communicate with them. "Keep your eyes open," Carter ordered, her voice tense. This could be a trap. They reached the stone structures, and the sight that greeted them made their blood run cold. At the center of the clearing stood a massive, pulsating crystal, its surface shimmering with an otherworldly energy. The glow was almost hypnotic, casting strange, shifting shadows across the valley. The hum had intensified, and now it seemed to be coming from within the crystal itself, vibrating through the ground like a heartbeat. Carter stepped forward, drawn to the crystal against her better judgment. She could feel the pull of its energy, like it was calling to her, urging her to touch it. But before she could get any closer, Simmons grabbed her arm, pulling her back with surprising force. "Commander, don't," Simmons said, his voice urgent. "That thing, it's not right." Carter hesitated, her eyes fixed on the crystal. She could sense the danger, but she also knew they couldn't leave without understanding what it was. She had to find out. "We need to scan it," she said, her voice steady but firm. "Rise, get the scanner. We need to know what we're dealing with." Rise nodded and stepped forward, pulling out the portable scanning device. He pointed it at the crystal, and immediately, a series of strange symbols appeared on the screen. The readings were off the charts, energy levels beyond anything they had encountered, fluctuating in ways that didn't make sense. "What the hell?" Rise muttered, his eyes widening in disbelief. "This is beyond anything we've ever seen." Carter's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean? Is it dangerous?" "I don't know," Rise said, shaking his head. "It's almost like it's alive, like it's controlling the energy around it." Carter stared at the crystal, her mind racing. This was the heart of Xerath, the source of the planet's power. And it wasn't just a source of energy. It was something far more dangerous. She could feel it now, deep in her bones. "We need to destroy it," Carter said, her voice low and cold. "Whatever it is, it's too dangerous to leave intact. If it's controlling this planet's energy, we can't let it spread." But as she turned to give the order to her team, the ground beneath them suddenly shook. The hum from the crystal grew deafening, and the air became thick with an oppressive force. Carter's eyes widened in realization. It wasn't just a source of power, it was a weapon, and they had just triggered its defense mechanism. The crystal pulsed with a bright, blinding light, and the ground cracked open beneath their feet. From the depths of the valley, something massive stirred, something ancient and powerful, something that had been waiting for them. "We've made a huge mistake," Carter whispered, just as the ground exploded in a torrent of chaos. The wrath of Xerath. The world shook violently beneath Carter's feet as the ground split open like a gaping mouth, swallowing the earth and threatening to consume them all. The hum from the crystal had become a deafening roar, its energy now like a tangible force pushing them back. The planet itself seemed to be coming alive, its defenses triggered, and it was clear they were no longer welcome. Carter barely had time to react. The shockwave from the explosion threw her and her team to the ground. Dust and debris filled the air, making it hard to breathe, and the once steady ground was now a jumbled mess of craters and fractures. "Get up," Carter shouted, her voice hoarse, as she scrambled to her feet, her hand gripping her side where the impact had left her bruised. She didn't wait to see if her team followed. There was no time. They had to move. Reyes and Simmons were already on their feet, coughing and looking around in a panic. Their weapons were drawn, but the air around them crackled with an oppressive energy that made it difficult to focus. "What the hell just happened?" Simmons asked, his voice filled with disbelief. "The crystal," Carter said through gritted teeth. "It triggered something. The planet. It's fighting back." The ground continued to rumble, and in the distance, a massive shadow loomed, rising from the earth like a living nightmare. Carter's eyes widened as she saw what had emerged from the depths of Xerath, a colossal armored figure, its body covered in jagged, rocky plating that seemed to pulse with the same energy as the crystal. It was like nothing they had ever seen before. Towering over them at least 10 times their height, it was a being of stone and power, its movements smooth despite its massive form. The sheer force of its presence was enough to make the air feel dense, and the temperature around them seemed to drop. "I knew it," Rise whispered. This planet was a weapon, a living weapon. Carter's mind raced. This wasn't just some random guardian of the planet. It was a force of nature, a manifestation of Xerath's will. They had inadvertently awakened it by disturbing the heart of the planet, the very crystal that had been its power source. But the creature wasn't the only threat. Carter could feel it now, the subtle shift in the atmosphere. The planet itself was alive, and it wasn't just protecting its core, it was trying to exterminate them. The ground cracked again, and a second massive creature emerged, this one even larger than the first. It was a twin of the first, rocky, towering, and impossible to stop. The hum that had filled the air earlier was now a deafening roar, vibrating through the very ground beneath them. "We're surrounded," Simmons said, his voice shaking. "We can't fight these things. They're—" "Shut up, Simmons," Carter barked, cutting him off. "We're not giving up. Not now. We've survived worse." But even as she said the words, she knew it was a lie. This wasn't just any enemy. They were up against the very heart of Xerath, a living, breathing planet that would stop at nothing to destroy them. Carter's eyes scanned the area frantically. They needed to move. They needed to find a way out. The creature's energy was building, and she could feel the pulse of power emanating from the ground itself. It wasn't just physical. They were being attacked on a molecular level. The planet was bending its energy against them. "Reyes, can you get a signal out?" Carter asked, turning to her comm specialist. Reyes shook his head, sweat dripping down his face. "The interference from the planet's energy is too much. We can't get a clear transmission." Carter cursed under her breath. They were cut off. The only option was to fight, no matter how impossible it seemed. "Then we fight," she said, her voice cold with determination. "Get ready. We're not dying here." But just as she prepared to make her move, the crystal in the center of the valley flared with a blinding light. It wasn't just a flash. It was a concentrated beam, like a spear of pure energy, shooting up into the sky. The creatures paused for a moment, their massive forms frozen as they stared at the beam. And then it happened. The crystal detonated in a massive explosion, sending a shockwave through the entire valley. The ground buckled under the force, and everything was thrown into chaos. The creatures let out roars of fury as the energy from the crystal surged outward, hitting them both with the force of 1,000 storms. The explosion created a blinding white light that seemed to engulf everything. Carter shielded her eyes, her heart pounding in her chest. They had no choice but to run, but she couldn't help but glance back as the light faded. The creatures were gone. The crystal's energy had destroyed them, but Carter had no illusions. This wasn't over. They had barely survived the wrath of Xerath, but they had no idea what consequences their actions would have. The planet had given them a taste of its power, and it wasn't done with them yet. "Move," Carter shouted, grabbing Simmons by the arm and pulling him away from the epicenter of the blast. "We need to get out of here now." But as they ran, Carter couldn't shake the feeling that the planet wasn't done with them, that Xerath had only just begun to show them what it was truly capable of. The fight for survival had only just begun.